From Washington, D.C. to the heart of America, welcome to Mark Alford's America. I'm freshman congressman from Missouri, Mark Alford, and I believe in America. I believe in you. And most importantly, I believe that our greatest days are still ahead. You know, each week we take you behind the scenes to share the stories, the news, legislation, to meet the great folks who are helping shape our wonderful nation. And today we're talking with Congresswoman Ashley Hinson, proudly representing Iowa's 2nd Congressional District. Congresswoman Hinson is a former local news anchor. Does that sound familiar? An AM news anchor, just like yours truly here. She shared the stories of countless Iowans, and she's bringing their stories to Washington to help shape federal policy and improve the lives of workers, farmers, seniors, veterans, and families in Iowa. Congresswoman Hinson is an Iowa native and an award-winning journalist. She previously served in the Iowa State House and represented Iowa's 67th House District, where she worked to balance the budget, cut taxes, and protect the most vulnerable in her community. And while working as a reporter at KCRG-TV in Cedar Rapids, she earned recognition at 2-time Midwest Regional Emmy Award winners, an RTNDA Health Reporting Fellow, and a Waypoint Tribute to Women's Honoree. Please welcome, actually we're in her office, she welcomed us in, Congresswoman Ashley Hinson. Good to see you.
It's great to be with you, Mark, and welcome to our makeshift studio, right?
I love it.
That's what this is. So
I joked early on when I met you. In fact, you called me, I think, after I won the primary to give me a little encouragement. And I did not know that there was another, I call us recovering reporters.
That's right. Recovering journalists.
Recovering journalists,
100%.
recovering morning news anchors here on Capitol Hill. And I thought maybe we could start our own morning show here.
Yeah, it would be a lot of fun, I think. And we certainly have no shortage of things to talk about here. And this week is no different, but it is a pleasure to serve with you, Mark. And I think what's really great, and you understand this as a journalist, your job actually doesn't change from what we did in our careers before to what we do now. I always told people, okay, well, maybe before I went to my sources and asked them what their perspective was, and I included that perspective in a story, and now we use that perspective to craft legislation instead.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of synergy there.
And instead of producers, we have staff, legislative assistants, legislative directors who are helping basically write the scripts,
right?
Help us formulate questions that we use in committee. There are a lot of similarities between this and broadcast journalism.
Absolutely. And you think about the training that we have from our previous careers in being able to really, in my mind, execute the most important agenda here, which is oversight, right? Oversight for the taxpayers and the people we represent. There is no better training than figuring out how to ask those tough questions of Biden administration officials or department heads, the bureaucrats who sometimes have to come before our committees and defend their decisions. I think that the training we've had, I certainly remember asking questions of even our sitting senators now that I work with, right? And I think about, there are many people who don't want to answer those questions, but I've tried to operate that same way here in Washington, D.C., of the same standard I held myself to as a journalist. I do a weekly press call, for example. So press can get on and ask me whatever question they want, because I think transparency and accountability are very, very important.
Do you miss TV?
I miss the people I worked with. The schedule, as you know, getting out of bed at 2 a.m. is not fun.
I don't miss that.
But ironically, I think I maybe slept more than I do now. But, I do miss the putting together a story. But again, here we get to tell stories all the time. And I think that's really critical to really changing hearts and minds in Washington, D.C., because you may only have 30 seconds with another member of Congress. That's why relationship building is so important. But you need to be able to communicate and get your point across and have a good example, some good context to draw from. So I think that has been huge in being successful here in telling compelling stories.
I don't know about you, but I wanted to be a reporter and an anchor since I was like in 5th grade. That's all I could think about. And when I was doing it, I had a great passion for it. But isn't it rewarding that now that we have the second chapter in our lives, that God's given us a new passion to serve people?
Well, instead of just talking about it, we get to do something about it. And I think that's really the most fulfilling thing for me is this is about problem solving, right? And so I enjoyed being a journalist and telling those stories. And sometimes they were very, very uplifting and they were great stories. And other times they were heartbreaking. And I'm sure you covered the same types of spectrum of stories. But here I feel like it's like, okay, well, hey, this is the problem. How do we fix it? And you're right. We have the writers who can come up with creative solutions and make sure we're crafting something that can actually help solve someone's problem. And I think that's very fulfilling.
One of the things as a journalist on television, I think most people try to remain unbiased, although that's technically impossible. Everyone's going to have biases in their lives, but you try to mask that as much as possible. I had a difficult time with that because I wanted to tell the truth on the air, and the management didn't necessarily want me telling the truth, so we had a lot of conflict. But now that you're out of that sphere where you have to remain neutral and you take sides in things that are controversial, like abortion policy, there are people now who do not like you, who before, you wanted everyone to like you, everyone to watch your show. And so you tried to lure everyone in. How do you deal with people not liking you?
Well, I think it was a rough awakening. I remember when I announced that I was running for State House, and I announced that I was a Republican running for State House because I had been a registered independent. I've always been a Republican. I used to make calls for George Bush when I was in high school, right? So, I've always been a Republican. But overnight, the reaction was fierce, right? And I think it was a testament to the fact that I had done my job really well because nobody knew what my party affiliation was, which I think is how it should be as a journalist. I think if you're making everybody mad, you're doing it right? And that's kind of the way you look at it. But I think that I took that very, very seriously from a credibility standpoint. And I think even now the media is dishonest about their objectivity. I'm always honest about my bias. Now people know where I stand. And I think that's really important, and you should be taking a stand. And what I say to people, especially because I do a lot of town halls in the district, and there's a variety of opinion back home in Iowa and here in Washington, D.C. And what I always tell everybody is like, guess what? You're always going to know where I stand. I'm going to take a position, but try to change my mind. But let's have a constructive conversation. So I had recently a climate activist come to one of my town halls, and, they were pitching a carbon fee and dividend pit solution, which I had her walk me. I said, so how does that functionally work? And she said, well, it's a fee for these companies on their pollution, and then we just give it to Americans. And I was like, so you're taking from one and giving it to another. And I was like, is there a requirement associated with those dollars? Like, do I have to buy a smart thermostat, or does it incentivize me to invest in less fertilizer for my lawn? What's the end goal here? And she's like, no, it's just cash for Americans. And I was like, that is socialism. And so I'm not afraid to push back, but I wanted her to try to explain to me why she supported that. And I think that's really important. We're going to have our disagreements. I care about the climate, but that's not the right solution. And I'm happy to stake my ground and explain why I think she's wrong. And I think we can do that in a respectful way. There are others who are less respectful, but I understand it's about consensus building. And I think ultimately, if you do your job really well here, you'll have some people who support you from both sides of the aisle. And I think that's really, really important.
How do we get to the point in America where we're so busy screaming at one another? You're not going to change people's minds by yelling. And yet there's a lot of yelling going on social media, even in person. How do we get back to that place in America where we're trying to win someone over through reason and not emotion?
Yeah, civility in politics and in our daily discussions, right? I think it is really hard. And I think social media has certainly fanned the flames of what we're experiencing in this country right now. Not to mention there is a fair amount of disinformation and interference from our foreign adversaries on our social media channels to try to drum that up even more, right? They understand that discord in our country is destructive to the freedom we enjoy. And so it's their goal and benefit to create as much of that chaos amongst Americans as possible. It makes us weaker. So I think we need to focus on, like what we were doing here, telling people the truth about what's going on, giving people the full context, telling the full story about policies and why they actually matter to people. And I think if we're doing that really effective as communicators, as members of Congress, that's how you start to change the temperature in the country.
I think words and terminology matters too. I just did a floor debate on the abortion policy that, the U.S. military since October is giving people money, dependents and military members, to travel to states that do allow abortion. Say in Missouri, you can't have an abortion, you can travel to Kansas and we'll pay for your travel. And they call it reproductive care. There's nothing reproductive about abortion. It's the complete opposite. It stops reproduction. Yeah. And yet through this word salad that the progressive woke broke liberals try to hoist on the American people, it confuses and confounds.
Yeah, these are the same people who are saying that I'm a birthing person and that men can get pregnant, right? I mean, so I think that there's a fair amount of skepticism. And I mean, they're pushing these policies not just at DOD and in our military, but in our schools, which I certainly, as a mama bear, am very frustrated by. I mean, it was my school district, my kid's school district, Linn-Mar, that decided last year that they wanted to allow kids to change their gender at school and not tell the parents. So a lot of problems in this space.
Ashley, we're going to talk a little bit more about that and some other things that you see as really threats to America right now in our society. Stay with us for Mark Offers America. We'll be back with more. We're talking with Congresswoman Ashley Hinson of Iowa about her role in the China Select Committee when we come back. A big threat to America. Stay with us, folks. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Mark Alford's America, where we give you a behind-the-scenes look at Washington, let you meet some of the people helping shape our nation. And today we're in 1717 Longworth on the 7th floor, 2 floors above my office. Congresswoman Ashley Hinson of Iowa, you've got a nice office here.
We call it the penthouse, but that's really not accurate.
You do have a balcony out there, which I'm a little jealous.
You can kind of scoot yourself out the window. It's not like a glamorous balcony by any means, but if you walk all the way around, you can get a view of the Capitol on the other side of the building. But
if you're just joining us, Ashley is a former morning news anchor in Iowa, so we have that in common. We also love America. And we also see, I think, China as a big threat, especially what's going on now. I'm on the Armed Services Committee. You're in some of these classified briefings too. It is, it is so scary to know what the Chinese Communist Party and the PLA are doing when it comes to Taiwan. Talk a little bit about China and how much they have their tentacles in everything that we do here in America.
Yeah, well, it is the stuff that keeps me up at night. And you mentioned those briefings, and it is terrifying. And I think that most Americans are ignorant to the threat that is facing our country every single day in the Chinese Communist Party. And we have been asleep at the wheel for decades when it comes to the appeasement strategy toward the Chinese. We thought we could change them. We thought we could bring them into the World Trade Organization and they would follow our rules. Every step of the way, they have tried to undermine our American economy and our American freedom. They want us to be like them, and they don't believe in freedom for their people. So they have, in my district, for example, we actually busted a Chinese spy ring in the middle of Iowa.
Where?
It happened in Dysart, Iowa, in Tama County, Iowa. The Chinese spy, his name was Robert Moe, and he was discovered literally stealing seed out of a test plot. And the reason the Chinese want to steal our seed is for all of the genetic research and development. So you think about this. How many billions of dollars of intellectual property have the Chinese stolen? And it's because they don't want to invest in that themselves. It's easier for them to steal it.
Right.
But that cost to every single American farmer, for example, it makes their product more expensive because now we're competing as American companies against Chinese companies that have just got this technology and they don't have to pay for it. So whether it's in the agriculture space, innovation in aerospace, they want to steal our plans there. Militarily, right? They've infiltrated our military with spies. They're sneaking onto our bases. They're scuba diving onto sensitive and secure sites. They're establishing spy base operations in Cuba. They're setting up police stations to harass their own people here in the United States. I mean, the list of
the Confucius centers, they're set up all over the nation.
Right, trying to impact the education system, not to mention the human rights atrocities that they are perpetrating on their own people. They are trying to completely wipe out the entire Uyghur Muslim race, right? So you look at the systematic approach that the Chinese have had. This is not by accident. And I think the fact that we have this bipartisan committee to tackle these issues and be strategic long-term, it's the first step, but we have a lot of work to do to catch up.
You say this is bipartisan. Do the Democrats see the potential existential threat that we see on our side? Because Joe Biden, he's like cozying up to Xi Jinping like they're coffee buddies, talking about the time they've spent together and how they're not a real threat. He just said it last week.
And I'm going to be critical of the Biden administration all day long and how they have handled what they call diplomacy to China. I call it appeasement because they continue to make concession after concession to get in the room and get an audience, and they're bending over backwards to make the Chinese happy. We need to speak strongly and carry a big stick, right? It's both of those things together because peace through strength, I mean, bullies respect strength.
Yes.
They don't respect weakness. And President Xi is a bully. He's bullied his way to power in China. He doesn't care about his own people. He cares about maintaining that power at all costs. So you talk about the threat to Taiwan. Our goal as a committee is to help support Taiwan, and many of those policies that we put recommendations out on are included in the NDAA, for example. We are looking at, and so we put out a 10 for 10 for Taiwan, 10 policy recommendations to help Taiwan. We've put out a report specifically on the human rights atrocities and what we can be doing there. More narrow policy to restrict goods and services made with slave labor, for example. But there is more we need to do economically to be competitive. And that's kind of where we're going next. We had a really good field hearing in New York City last week. And ahead of that, we actually did a kind of an economic war game. What levers are they going to be pulling in 2028 if we end up in a conflict? How much pain are they willing to inflict and endure on their own to cause that pain to us?
Well, 65% of the world's goods goes through the Straits of Taiwan and the South China Sea.
Right.
If we do go to a conflict, war with China, that traffic's going to be, it's going to be a sea war. And that's going to be coming to a ground halt. It's going to make COVID look like a cakewalk. There are predictions you will see 5% of what you see on the store shelf now.
Yeah. Well, and I do think, to answer your earlier question better, I think Democrats do understand the threat that China poses. And I do think that's why you've seen bipartisan recommendations come out of our committee. I think some of the tougher areas that we are going to face challenges are mining and permitting, for example. That's something that we have been very forward on our policy as Republicans in the House this year, to make sure we're actually moving things forward so we can produce those things, both energy and mine those critical earth minerals here at home, so we aren't reliant upon China. Moving our pharmaceutical operations back here as much as possible so that, if they can pull the lever and all of a sudden we no longer have penicillin, our people are not going to get sick and die, right? We have to be forward thinking about some of those policies, but specifically, on it's climate, right? That the Democrats are not going to get on board with some of the things that we need to be able to do. But our argument back is the reason we should be doing this here is because we can do it safer, we can do it cleaner, and we can do it without relying on young children in Africa to mine these things that we all need and want. So I think that there may be some disagreements about how we get there, but I think ultimately, I think across the spectrum, people understand the threat that China poses to us and the need to be strategically competitive.
I think we also, as Americans, have to wean ourselves off the cheap crap that comes from China. This immediate gratification that we feel like we have to have something now and at a cheap price. When I was growing up at Walmart, everything in Walmart was made in America. They advertised that. It was a selling point. And we have lost that pride of things made in America.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that at some point we have to decide as Americans, do we want to take a stand and have the right value system and support American jobs, maybe pay a little bit more for our goods so that we're not relying on Chinese cheap labor or elsewhere in the world? We're going to have to make a decision, I think, as consumers and point the country in the right direction. I think there is a place for government policy in helping to make sure we incentivize things to come here so that we aren't reliant on the supply chain of other countries for necessary things. And so I think that there's a combination of those things that have to happen. We just need to figure out how much weight we want to put on the scale.
Your husband and children must be very proud of what you're doing.
Well, I'm glad they still know my name. My biggest thing is when I am home, I have tried, I had to set some boundaries very early on. You understand, Mark, about the requests on your time are very great, whether you're here in DC or back home in the district. And so when I am home, I walk my kids down to the school bus in the morning, and then I try to be home by about 4:30. I get my work done in the district. I'm out on the road. I have 22 counties, so big rural district like yours. And I think it's really important you show your constituents that you still value your family and you still value life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is why I still try to be wife and mom first. But there are a lot of demands on our time, and I love my family, and I couldn't do it without them.
None of us is guaranteed the next victory in an election. What do you want to be remembered for here as your work in Congress?
Well, when I came here, I had three main goals. I want people back in my district to know that I am the taxpayer champion. I am fighting for rural America to make sure we have a seat at the table and that we have safe and secure communities. And if I have achieved those goals and made progress there, I will be very happy if that's what people remember me for.
Any long-term goals? You're just taking it one day at a time.
One day at a time.
Yeah.
That's how you have to do it around here, clearly. I think, Serving in Congress was never a part of my game plan for life. And so I think that this has been an incredible honor, and I think it's an opportunity every single day to solve problems and get something done.
Well, Ashley, thank you so much. I enjoy your mentorship, your friendship, and your love for our country.
Thank you,
think
Mark.
it's very admirable, and I look forward for you helping me become a better member. I'm always striving to be better in this, so thank you.
It goes both ways, and your constituents should be very proud of you too.
Thank you. Hey, folks, that's it. Remember, I believe in you. I believe our best days are ahead of us, and yes, I believe in America.